Okay, we're going to go ahead and reconvene into regular session. I'll turn it over to County Council so you can report out of our closed session.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Board of Supervisors met in closed session to discuss agenda items number 1 through 7 on today's agenda. Agenda item number 1 was to meet and confer with the county's labor negotiators. The agency designated representatives are Allison Hauk, Ray Espinoza, Joe Paul Gonzalez, Melinda Casillas, George Cochran, and Steve Coffey. The employee organizations discussed was the Institutions Association, Law Enforcement Management, Management Employees Group, SEIU Local 521, the General Unit Employees, SEIU Local 2015, the IHSS, Deputy Sheriff's Association, Confidential Employees, Confidential Management Employees, Department Heads, and Unrepresented Employees. The authority to meet can be found in California Government Code Section 54957.6. At this time, the Board took no reportable action. In regards to agenda number 2, the Board met and conferred with legal counsel regarding existing litigation pursuant to Subdivision A and D1 of Government Code Section 54956.9. The case involved is the County of San Benito versus Christina M. Martinez et al., filed in the Superior Court of California in the County of San Benito under case number CU-15-0063. This time, the Board took no reportable action. In regards to agenda item number 3, the Board met and conferred with legal counsel regarding existing litigation pursuant to Subdivision A and D1 of Government Code Section 54956.9. The name of the case is the County of San Benito versus Maximo R. Ornelius and Juanita L. Ornelius et al., filed in the Superior Court of California in the County of San Benito under case number CU-15-0077. At this time, the Board took no reportable action. Agenda items number 4 and 5 were removed from today's agenda, and they were not discussed in closed session. In regards to agenda item number 6, the Board met and conferred with legal counsel regarding existing litigation pursuant to subdivisions A and D1 of section 54956.9 in the case of Rancho Gavilan versus the County of San Benito et al., filed in the Superior Court for the County of San Benito under case number CU-15-00142. At this time, the Board took no reportable action. Finally, in regards to agenda item number 7, the Board met with legal counsel regarding anticipated litigation and the significant exposure to litigation pursuant to subdivisions D2 and E5 of Government Code Section 54956.9 in one case. The facts and circumstances justifying closed session in this case was a statement made regarding potential litigation if the county proceeds forward with the purchase of the property located at 1161 San Felipe Road for a new homeless shelter. And at this time, the Board took no reportable action. Thank you.
Okay, Council, thank you for that. This is the opportunity for the public to address the Board on items of interest not appearing on the agenda. No action may be taken unless provided by Government Code Section 54954.2. So for public comment, Mr. Clerk, do we have any speakers?
Mr. Chairman, Richard Gallagher.
Good morning, Supervisors.
Morning.
Morning, public. My name is Richard Gallagher. I'm a member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and I'm on the Veterans Park Commission and the County Parks Commission. And I'm concerned and curious about what our timeline is to open up San Justo Reservoir.
Okay, so Mr. Gallagher, I'm sorry I have to cut you off there because that is actually an item on our agenda, which, looking at our agenda, it is item 22, I believe.
Is there any way we can move that up in the agenda?
So that would be the time to provide the comments. It is the first item on the regular agenda, so I would imagine it'd be half hour, 40 minutes or so.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. I'll be here.
Thanks, Mr. Gallagher. Sorry about that. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Chairman, we have Marvin Jones.
Mr. Chairman, board members, Marvin Jones from Hollister. 10:30. I'm sure there's some special interests that have a benefit from having the closed session at 9 o'clock. There are special interests, repeating that, there are probably some special interests that have a benefit of having a closed session at 9 o'clock. You got what? 60, 70 people sitting here. They'd have been here at 9. They have wasted an hour and a half. That's 2 man-weeks of labor, in excess of 2 man-weeks of labor, just so that you can accommodate some special interest. If you want less public participation, if you want less public involvement, continue having the closed session first and making people sit around for another hour or longer, is today, an hour and a half. If you want public participation, if you want some individual interest in the government of San Benito County, go back to having closed session after the regular session. Again, repeating myself, if you want more invisibility of the activity of the Board of Supervisors of San Benito County, continue with your closed session first. If you want public interest, have your closed session last. Thank you, sir.
We have Mr. Marty Rich. Mr. Richmond. We have the mayor. Mayor Velasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and supervisors. Just want to let you know I've been invited to be part of a group of mayors throughout Silicon Valley that are going to be visiting China in late May. And the purpose is to introduce our communities to the business community in China. And hopefully what I'm hoping from all of you is that you can partner with the city, help me with information on what would bring Chinese businesses here to San Benito County. And with the city of Hollister, we can go out and promote our community while I'm on that trip. We're visiting about 10 different cities over 10 days. I think it's going to be very productive. It's a good chance for us to not only present what we have, but what they want. There's a lot of need right now in China for agricultural products, and we have it here. And also they need space to bring some of their factories. So I think it's a good opportunity, and I'm hoping we can work together on putting together a plan or a presentation to help bring some businesses here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
That is all, Mr. Chairman, for items not appearing on the agenda.
If there are additional speakers who wish to provide comments, now's the time. Step forward.
Yours is for a non-agenda.
Right, I saw that. Yeah, I was a little disappointed. First of all, Chairman, Board, thank you very much. Disappointed that you shut down the last guy with the San Justo topic, because I guess it is on the calendar now. I had to cut out of work, which I have to leave, so I won't be here for that. I just wanted to comment that the 8 years of non-activity, it's too long.
Okay, so I apologize, but I have to cut you off as well. Rules are rules, right?
Okay.
And so if you can, if you'd be willing to email us your remarks, we would be happy to read them.
I will. I've done some research. I'll share with you. Okay, thank you.
I appreciate it. And again, I apologize. Thank you. All right, so moving forward, department head announcements. Mr. CAO?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we have a department head announcement coming out of our Health and Human Services Department. We have Jim Riding Sword here, the director for that agency.
Good morning. So I'm here to update the board on the public health officer position in our public health division. As board members may or may not know, Dr. Goel has resigned and moved on to other things. At the moment, we have an interim public health officer, Dr. Ira LaBelle. He was our interim between Dr. Garza and Dr. Goel. We are in the process of recruiting. I don't know if it's quite been posted yet, but we are interested in people, letting us know, particularly if there's somebody in the community who might be able to fill in as a public health officer for us on a permanent basis. We definitely are looking for the next public health officer, somebody that can help us with that position. Okay?
Well, thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
So we also have our next item Administration will be pulling or removing item number 12 from the agenda. We'll be addressing that at a later date. That's on consent. And the third item that we have is just a reminder to you and the public that we have a special board meeting that is going to be March 15th, and that's going to be reviewing our budget. So if there's any input from the public, it'd be great to hear. But more importantly, we're going to discuss finances and where we're going for our next year's budget for fiscal year 16-17. So that's it, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. CAO. So moving on to the agenda, item F, board announcements. I'll start to my left and Supervisor Barrios.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. First of all, I want to thank our CAO, Ray Espinosa, and staff for the high performance training that we all attended on February the 29th. It was very, very informative. It was put on by Mr. Tony Gardner from the University of Virginia. And it was, I guess the organization is called Commonwealth Centers for High Performance Organizations. And what that was, it really gives us insight on how we can engage our employees, how we can create leaders within our county employees, leadership at all levels. And there was one other point that I wanted to make. Operating with clear direction and parameters, which is always helpful for any organization, but particularly, our county government. So I appreciate you bringing him to this county, and I think it was time well spent. The second thing is that I would like to direct our CAO and staff with the remarks that were made by our mayor that we go ahead and coordinate with the city. So direct staff to perhaps put something together that he can take with him, or that we can give him in the form of a CD, handouts, whatever we can do to promote San Benito County and take advantage of that wonderful trip that's to come. The last thing is that our county superintendent of schools is still making a great effort with Above the Influence, organizing the community to address the fight against drugs among our children. It's still out there. It's still a very serious issue, and public safety has been at those meetings. The county, the city has been represented with our sheriff's department, probation department, city police, and so we all have to continue to fight the fight and make sure that our children are protected. So let's support her in her effort, and there are planned community presentations that will be forthcoming. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor Barrios. Supervisor De La Cruz.
None, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Supervisor Munzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, just want to thank the CAO, Ray Espinosa, for the training session and finding out what the rest of the staff is going through. It was very informative, and I actually ended up at the staff training one day at lunchtime, and it seemed to be very well received. So thank you again, Ray.
Supervisor Patello.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of items. Supervisor Munzer and I attended an intergovernmental meeting with the city last week and received a presentation on the wayfinding program, which probably in the near future we'll have a presentation to the full board. I think it's a great program that could benefit the county as well as our two cities. Kind of uniformity of signage of our assets in our county and where key points of interest are. Take some money. It's probably be an ongoing program that is a required coordination between the county and the city and other entities such as maybe the Chamber of Commerce, Downtown Association. So we're looking forward to that. We also received a report on residential development in the city of Hollister that was very informative, and the county will give a similar report next month. We also had the fire committee meeting, and again, it kind of segues into a concern that we've been expressing as far as impact fees and bringing them up to date. We definitely need to consider increase to meet the needs of a growing community. We're short of updated apparatuses or fire engines. turnouts for expanded reserve program, and that kind of led into another committee meeting that I had with Supervisor De La Cruz, prioritizing law enforcement and firefighting impact fees going forward and bringing that to the board. And tomorrow, myself, appointed through COG, with Ms. Gilbert, our COG director, we're travel to Sacramento for the Central Coast Coalition, in which we're meet with state transportation leaders, and we're going to have 5 points of that we're urge legislators and department transportation folks, California Transportation Commission, in supporting a funding package, particularly AB 1591 Fraser, to amend the state funding for regional agencies to program towards projects that are specific for our regional transportation plans, and a number of other areas. Also, the importance of regional more regional agencies to become self-help counties through local transportation measures, and that's one area that I want to really plug. In order to protect our community's greatest assets, our roads, we really need this measure that we're talk about later on in the agenda for it to be adopted as a tax measure, half cents for transportation in this county. So with that, we could leverage more state funds and bring our roads up to sufficient maintenance. That's what I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Supervisor Patel. I myself have no announcements. So moving on to the consent agenda. Staff has pulled item 12 permanently. I've been requested by 2 members of the board to pull and hold off on item 18 for discussion. And so if there's any, are there any other items from consent that the board wish to pull?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd like to pull item number 8 and number 10.
8 and 10. Okay. Is there any member of the public who wish to provide a comment on any items on the consent or wish to pull items on the consent calendar? See none, I will accept a motion for approval of the remainder of the consent.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. So we'll start with item 8, Supervisor Barrios.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only reason I pulled that one is because of the date. The contract says or has March the 8th, 2015, and I'm assuming that should be 2016. I don't see
on our agenda it says 2016.
The agenda, but the contract itself says 2015. So I just want to make sure we have clarification.
You want to step up? So yeah, it sounds like an oversight. Just needs
it may be an oversight, but we want to make sure that because we're paying an amount specific for a period of time, we want to make sure that we don't. Somebody doesn't come back later and say, "Hey, I did this for 2 years."
Sure.
Not.
Good morning. My name is
Morning.
Linda Yoshikawa. I'm one of the managers at Behavioral Health. So yes, it's for 2016 for March as a begin date.
So we could go ahead and make that correction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
And so with that, are there any comments from anyone from the public? See none, I'll bring it back to the board.
I move to approve the contract per staff recommendation with the change noted.
Okay. Second? Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. So moving on to item 10, Supervisor Barrios.
Item 10, the only reason I pulled that is because there was a lot to read, and which is great because I know the reason why they all came to us at one time, because we were going through the process of change. But through that process, there were a lot of little mistakes that, I hate to be a stickler about stuff like that, but I want our county records to be right on. And they're not major, but there are things like Santana Ranch being called Santa Ranch, people being, identified as belonging to a certain organization, but they actually belong to a different. So if I have your permission, I can work with our clerk of
Sounds
the
good to
board,
me.
bring those points out, correct them, but we can approve them, certainly knowing that they're nothing major. Okay. They just need to be
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Rest of the board?
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor?
Supervisor Barrios, I know you're not going to seek re-election. Are you interested in doing pro bono work for the county?
No. But I may be calling you and asking you to put in the agenda to make the corrections.
Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this item? See none, I'll bring it back.
Okay, I will make a motion that we approve all the minutes presented with the idea that I will get together with our clerk of the board to make the minor corrections on names and spelling and that sort of thing.
Is there a second?
I'll second that motion, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
there's a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. So now moving on to item 18, Supervisor Munzer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I need to recuse myself as my wife owns property within 300 feet of the project. So I will recuse myself now.
Well, don't go too far.
I won't.
All right. And I know Supervisor Botello had some concerns about this item as well.
Yes, I do. I don't know if Byron or Brent want to take these questions, but I want to have an understanding what triggers the difference between a negative deck and a full EIR on some of these projects.
Well, it's a judgment call, but the staff conducts excuse me. Staff conducts an initial study under CEQA, and based on the results of that initial study, which is a very quick look at all of the topical issues that usually come into a CEQA analysis, determines if there are potential impacts that are insurmountable or can be mitigated away. And in this case, correct me, Byron, if you think I'm wrong, but in this case, the impacts seem to be potentially mitigatable by attaching conditions of approval to the project.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's how are we addressing the cumulative impacts and growth of all these projects that we know that haven't been filed, that have been just kind of talked about, and knowing what the mitigations should be imposed on them individually?
Sure, a very good question. Cumulative impacts and ancillary impacts are definitely a part of the CEQA analysis. One of the things that we've done recently is, I hate to use the word bundle, but I guess it's the only word I can think of right now, is bundle a series of projects together that are all in the same area and attempt to look at what we think will be the cumulative impacts of all of those projects in terms of traffic, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. The things that we know will occur on a more regional basis are important to look at on a more regional basis. Some projects, some impacts are clearly like geological hazards, for example, are clearly associated with a particular piece of property and probably don't need a more regional analysis. But things like traffic impacts and creating a street network that makes sense on a more regional scale are clearly things that benefit from a collective analysis. And so that's the approach that we're taking. We're proposing to do technical studies that underpin future CEQA analysis. It's undecided yet whether ultimately that CEQA analysis on the individual properties, the individual developments as they come forward, would be negative declaration or an environmental impact report. If the property owner, for example, steps up and says, I'm good with all of the mitigation measures that are proposed in this traffic analysis, just for example, and we can make them a part of the design of the project, that mitigates away the potential impacts, and they don't need to go through an environmental impact report for that particular issue. Now, there may be other issues, again, geologic or housing issues or parks or something else that would trigger a full CEQA analysis, a full EIR.
Mm-hmm. So if this project was twice the size, would that go to a full EIR, or it would still be mitigated negative deck?
There's no clear threshold. It depends on the conditions of the property itself, but very likely it would have gone to an environmental impact report. We did an EIR on the Del Webb project, for example.
Yeah, then that's what I'm
Which much bigger
somewhat
project.
concerned about, because this project might be paired up with the project within Ridgemark itself, and when this was first proposed, it went through an EIR process back in early 2000, and I don't know what has changed that now it's suitable for a mitigated negative deck. It's concerning.
Do you have details, Byron?
I think that what's important to note is that the decision hasn't necessarily been made yet. Once we get the consultant on board, then they're going to look at the specifics of the project, do an initial study, and if all the impacts can be mitigated, then we can do a mitigated negative declaration. If there's impacts that can't be mitigated, then that kicks it to an EIR. We try not to pre-commit to for any project what kind of environmental analysis is going to be required until we're able to sit down with it and really get into it. So that's what we're doing with this item, is getting the consultant on board, and the next step will be an initial study.
Right. And is one last question. We're a little bit behind the curve on the affordable housing program. Does the CEQA address any of that, or is that something that we'll have to address with each developer as we move projects forward?
At this time, as we're implementing our housing element, which does have affordable housing component to it, we'll be taking that to the Planning Commission next week. At this time, though, as applications come in, the only affordable housing requirements are the voluntary requirements that we have on the books, and so they're not requirements at all. So through development agreements or other agreements, we can require affordable housing. But as part of CEQA analysis doesn't necessarily take a look at the affordability.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of, because I'm really concerned about some of these issues I'm bringing up. And we talked about it at the retreat. I want to see these projects have a little bit more in-depth environmental work. I also want to see development agreements where they're addressing some of this, because there's not any houses being built for workforce. I mean, not just transitional housing, but people that live and work in our community cannot afford what's being built, at least from the county, and so this is continuing to be an issue for me.
Okay. Are there any questions or comments from members of the board? Any questions or comments from members of the public? See none, I'll bring it back to the board.
So one quick, so I'm clear on this. So this study here will determine whether further studies for environmental issues will be addressed and could trigger an EIR if we're finding that the cumulative growth in this area should be taken a harder look at.
Part of the consultant's scope of work is to look at all environmental impacts, and so as they're identified, and cumulative impacts is included. So as they're identified, then if we have to modify the contract, then we can always come back here.
All right.
Thank you, Byron. Okay. Is there a motion for this item?
With that understanding, I'll make a motion to go ahead and approve this.
Okay.
Item.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Okay, with that, we will move on to item 20, our public hearing. Mr. Barnes or Byron?
I need to click anything to get it up there. Thank you. This item we're here to discuss and hopefully adopt a resolution that will modify our traffic impact fees that was last updated in 2011. I'm going to be very brief and turn it over to Dino Serafini, who has a presentation to discuss the details and the methodology, as well as the results of the most recent traffic study. After the presentation, it will be staff's recommendation to adopt the resolution that updates our traffic impact fees, which would then go into effect in 60 days. Mary Gilbert from COG is also here if you have any questions, and Dino. And my understanding that County Council will have a few comments at the end as well. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Dino.
Thank you, Byron. Good morning, Chairman Rivas and members of the board. Thank you for having me address this this study that staff of the City of Hollister, the County of San Benito, and myself and our subconsultants have been working on for more than the past year, and so we're pleased to be able to finally present it. This is the regional traffic impact fee. This is a fee that has been in place in the county for at least the past couple of decades. It was implemented or was updated last in 2011, so the time is right for a 5-year update. So we're going to briefly go through some of the highlights of the update, what's been included, and the resulting fee. The purpose of the update was to review some of the improvements and the costs that were included in the last update, and we've added improvements. We went with a set of specific intersections. The last update had just kind of an estimate of what total impact or total intersection costs would be, and we've identified, I think, 12 or 13 separate intersections and provided a cost for those. We've added some mobility improvements, bike lanes, and some key bridge widening that had not been included in the earlier study. And we reviewed the fee benefit zones, and we incorporated the new county general plan update into the traffic model. I'd like to touch on something that was talked about in the last agenda item that Board Member Botello brought up, cumulative impacts. The TIMF should be considered an integral part of CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. It is, for traffic improvements, the key mitigation for cumulative impacts. There's probably no other way that a jurisdiction could mitigate cumulative impacts except by an impact fee, and that's what it's designed for exactly. The general principles: the fee is calculated to generate no more and no less than development's fair share. So what the impact that new development places on the regional road system, we convert that to a cost, and that's what they're paying. The county would rather have the improvements than the fees. This is not a means of generating revenue. This is to offset the cost of providing improvements. If a developer were to come in and build the improvements that are eligible, they are eligible for a credit. So we talked about some improvements that were added. These are some of the major road improvements. And an added project was the Phase 2 of the SR 25 widening. That was a $181 million project. Was not included in the last update. There was a set of enhancements, a widening of 25 in lieu of the full widening to the county line for Phase 2. And at our last COG board meeting, it was brought up that improvement should be added. So that's major, probably the major cost component of the increase of the fees. Some other major So some other additions to the program: Flynn Road extension. There's a new east-west collector between San Felipe Road and Memorial Drive, and we'll get to a map of that. And then the bicycle lanes. Bicycle lanes on the roadways, separate bike lane, paved bike lane with a 9-foot lane plus a buffer. And bike paths and multi-use trails that are considered that would provide some mobility improvements that are intended to take trips off the roadway. So I wanted to I could probably do that here. So the major addition to the project is this section of, it's called the Phase 2, 125, Hudner Lane right about there. The Phase 1 went from San Felipe to Hudner. We're adding this section to the county line, and that's the $181 million. It's increasing from a 2-lane collector to a 4-lane major. Some of the other improvements or additions: the Flynn Road connection connects San Felipe Road to the Memorial Drive North extension that goes from Santa Ana right here and makes this connection between the 25 overpass, bypass, and San Felipe. And that we're calling the Pacific Way extension. It's a connection between San Felipe Road and the Memorial Drive North extension. So that project would open up this area here, this substantial undeveloped area. Most of that land would not have direct access to 25, so it couldn't be considered a frontage improvement. I mean, for the Pacific Way extension, it includes an overcrossing, so that's why it's included in the program. I think that's about it with the new projects. So I want to look at the overall cost estimate. Total cost of all the roadway improvements, about $400 million. As I mentioned, we looked at intersections individually, and the cost estimate for those $15.3 million. The bike paths, the total cost of all the bike paths that are in the county's mobility plan for bike facilities is $33. I want to point out that the TIMF share is only 1.9. So those are the bike lane improvements and the regional trail improvements that are specifically seen as benefiting traffic. And then back up, the TIMF share is just that portion of the total cost estimate that is attributable to new development. So, excuse me, quick finger. So what's left over in this column is the city, county, or regional share or other. This is what this is the responsibility of the current development in the county. And one source of income could be the Measure A. Is it the tax? I think it's got the half-cent override. That would be a source of funding. So the total TIMF share is about $239 million, leaving $258 million for the existing development. We talked about fee zones. Right now we have. This is the proposed zoning. This line hasn't changed. The Zone 1 and 2 boundary has undergone some slight revision. The area that's within the dash line was part of the previous Zone 2, and part of previous Zone 1. It shifted to Zone 2, and just focusing on the city of San Juan Bautista in Zone 1. So previously, San Juan Bautista was included with 2 zone. The same, the rest of the urbanized area of the county.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah. Who designates the zones? How do they get identified and by whom? Is that part of your study? I probably should know this, but I'm a little bit confused as to how the change came about and who makes that change.
Well, the original zones were set in the 2010-2011 study, and the attempt was to separate out areas that have vastly different trip generation factors that would have less impact on the overall road network if it were to build out. So if you look at Zone 3, very little development, and most of the trips, if any, that are generated there would not use the road system in the urbanized area around the city.
So your study then identifies why the change should happen, and it changes the boundaries then.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
So,
I just needed to get clarification on how that came about, but it is because you're studying it, and if there hasn't been a significant change in one zone, then that boundary can stay the same.
Right. So the big change is including taking San Juan Bautista out of what I call the Hollister, the greater Hollister zone, and it reduces the fee to the area in San Juan Bautista because the trips that are generated by the city, San Juan Bautista, are minimal and don't really compare to some of the development that is projected to occur around the city of Hollister.
Okay.
Thank you. If I could help with answer that question as well, people in the northern west part of the county probably wouldn't be using Highway 25 that much.
Yeah.
And that was the logic of it.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the original logic. That the original Zone 1 included the Aeromass, this little peninsula out here. That they wouldn't use the network more to the south and the east.
Yeah, and I just want to add that the changes were presented to the COG board, and we discussed them and actually tweaked them a little bit one way or the other. So I guess, and Supervisor Patella and Mary can let me know if I'm wrong, but I think the COG board is the one that had the ultimate decision on what the boundaries were.
Right. Yeah, that's very much a discretionary action.
Mr. Chairman, would there be any direct correlation by changing from one zone to another? In other words, would more funding go to a Zone 2 versus a Zone 1?
There would have to be a big change in the boundary line itself to do that.
No, but I mean, my understanding is that because in this area, for example, in this case, is Zone 1 right now, right? San Juan Bautista is Zone 1 right now, if we go forward with this one.
Yes,
and thus they will pay less because of all those other considerations.
They're in Zone 2.
So when it comes time to allocate money for roads repair,
right?
Would it be that wouldn't matter, right?
No, the allocation of projects themselves is not dependent on the zone. So if the question is like the fee study says you're going to generate so many dollars in this zone, those dollars are going to stay in that zone. No, most of the projects are in Zone 2. And that's why we drew the boundaries as they are, because the Zone 1 development would not really benefit from some of those projects.
How about a bike lane? How would that affect the zoning?
Well, the bike lanes are the overall question of mobility improvements is something that was discussed by the board and staff, and the desire to put mobility improvements in the program. Now, bike lanes is part of what's called a complete street approach to try to encourage people to use bikes, reduce traffic to the extent that's possible. So that's kind of the thinking. So putting the bike lanes in, and it's substantial. We're talking about 12 feet of pavement now, and using that, for bike facilities. The idea is to reduce traffic and make it safer for the bicyclists, to encourage them to use the facility. So there's no study there have been studies about how much people use bikes, obviously, in urbanized areas. Our study doesn't include those factors necessarily. So overall, it's kind of a small percentage anyway in the overall program. I'll quickly go through the fee methodology. We took the general plan, the county general plan, and adjusted some of the traffic analysis zone traffic projections. We added the proposed improvements, and then we ran a traffic model with the revised fee zones, and we determined what the percentage of this traffic was going to be using the network, the new traffic, and then we allocated that traffic to each zone, and the vast majority of the trips are generated within Zone 2 in the urbanized area around Hollister. And then the cost of the improvements are allocated to the zones based on the percentage of the traffic growth. And then we divide the allocated cost by the number of peak period trips, and that results in a cost per trip. So that's a standard rate. A cost per trip doesn't matter whether they're generated by residential or commercial. That's that vehicle, the peak period trip, imposes that cost on the system. And what we instituted what was done in the 2010-11 study was what we call the commercial trip shift. Before 2010, there wasn't a fee for commercial. It was all residential. And with 2010, the commercial fee was adopted with the provision, the understanding that a certain number of trips, commercial trips, are generated by the residents. The reason why the store has customers is because of the residential development in the area. So it was determined through analysis that about 51% of the trips on the roadway are generated by the local residents. So it was felt that it was reasonable to take those trips generated, they're called like pass-by trips. So if somebody's going from one stop place to another, they're going to stop and pull out in a store, a local store, and make their purchase. Those costs are backed out of the fee that would be charged to the retail, commercial retail, and applied to the residential. So it's the trips that are shifted, and then the cost associated with that trips were shifted to residential. So it's the 51% results in lowering the fee for the commercial land uses by 50%. And these are the residential fees, the proposed fee, and the current fee for zones 1, 2, and 3. That was residential. This is commercial, retail, and industrial. And again, for the commercial, those fees for zones 1 and 2, they're about half of what they would be without the commercial shift. That's why the commercial appears to be so much lower than the office. The retail, that commercial shift was not applied to office. Talk a little bit about the other funding sources. Approximately $258 million must be provided by the state, regional, or other local sources. 71% of the other funds are for roadway improvements, and those are due to what's the current deficiencies. That's the level of service that is less than the adopted standard. The adopted standard is level of service C or D. So in some of the roadways, 25, for example, State Route 25, it is deficient. So a portion of the 25 cost, the cost to upgrade State Route 25 would have to come from other sources. some of the TIMP deficiency is increased by the cap that was put on. The TIMP share cap for 156 is $9.6 million, and that was put in place in the 2010 study, 2010-11. Again, the recreational trails were not included in the study, and there are substantial costs for the river trails and the pedestrian facilities on those. Those were not included in the TIMP study. So as we took our principle is 100% recovery of the fair share cost of new development, each zone, land use in that zone. And a caveat is that discounting or waiving fees on a particular land use, you can do that. It's within the board's discretion to lower any fee. What we're presenting is kind of the maximum justified fee. You could lower the fee for any use, but with the proviso that that fee cannot be shifted then to another land use. So you'd, in effect, be reducing the revenue. But you make that finding and reduce the fee if that's within any policy direction that supervisors want to go. Okay, the next step is open the public hearing at your discretion, and adopt the resolution, and then the fee would become effective 60 days after adoption. So.
Are there any comments from members of the board?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to state that this is a very important step in putting Highway 25 back on the constraint list, which was on everybody's radar a year ago. And in conjunction with a action that we'll be taking in a few minutes on the sales tax, I feel that we will be able to do something significantly to improve traffic and traffic flow on Highway 25 in the very near future, which I never had that feeling before, but I think we're making headway toward resolving the issues with Highway 25. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor Munzer. Supervisor Patel?
Yeah, thank you. As the presenter mentioned early in his presentation, this has been in the works for quite some time, about a year. And this presentation, or at least the fee structures, have been put out into the public, and we've had public hearings at Council of Governments and made presentations at various community groups. And so I think it is time that we adopt this new fee structure, and also maybe at some point in time evaluate the impacts on economic development, whether I do have concerns about the commercial rates and office rates, whether or not we could develop language that through an economic feasibility study justify waiving fees. But at this point in time, I think we need to go forward.
Structure is good, yeah. Okay. Are there any other comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, thank you. Two very quick questions. The first question, the first set of projects has not changed, right?
Right. Those haven't changed.
So now you have a new set of projects with the old.
Yeah, we added those four.
Okay. Perfect.
Projects. Yeah.
Thank you. And then the other question, I'm looking at the intersection numbers, and I can only assume that phase 2 of the Highway 25, that Wright Road going to Highway 25, we've been seeing an increase of accidents occurring there. Did COG ever consider adding that intersection to the list, or is it part of that phase 2 Highway 25 improvement?
Yeah, all the intersections related to the arterials are included in that overall
Wright
cost.
Road and intersection of Wright Road and 25.
I'm not specifically sure about that, but I imagine it would be. And I know that there is an analysis. You're doing a feasibility study for 25, I think. That's on the way.
I mean, I know that kind of it's Caltrans and all the other good stuff, but we've been having more and more accidents happening on that right road. Turning left up to going to Gilroy.
Supervisor?
Yeah, I think the cost estimate, $181 million, includes all the intersection and safety improvements.
Ms. Barrios, you have
Thank you so much. I have some concerns, although I think that this is long time overdue. We need to make sure that we are made whole with our costs. I have two concerns. The first one is, Supervisor Botello, you brought up affordable housing. Everybody, it doesn't matter what size the home is, if it's single family, you're going to pay a lot of money if you're within Zone 2. What does that do for bringing in affordable housing? If you have a developer that can save on the impact fees, I mean, we can certainly maybe address to some extent to be able to build these homes, because then maybe they'll say, okay, well, I saved some money, so now I can build perhaps something smaller because I don't have to pay such a high fee. The other concern that I have, it's similar to school impact fees. I think those are done based on square footage. So I kind of have a little trouble with that, because then we're not doing what we should be doing to bring in that affordable housing. The second thing is that I know that as I read through it, we could waive the impact fees. For instance, an employer comes in and is going to bring in a lot of jobs. We do have the authority to waive some of the fees to be able to encourage that kind of commercial, business, industrial, whatever that may be. Because if I'm looking at the jobs, we've got 36,000 plus people, only 8,000 jobs. 2 of those people are going to be likely working adults.
Right.
And so I think we really need to be careful on how we word the waiving of the fees and try to be a little more proactive in showing that we are willing to waive those, provided that you can do this, and that to bring jobs to the community. So I don't know how to address that. It's very general in here, but I really would like to be a little more proactive there and maybe change the wording somewhat. So
right, and there's, like I said,
Mr.
there's
Chair.
various policy directions and things that you would want to do that would be a benefit for the community. What we are doing is coming up with just a basic cost for that trip, for that use. Waiving fees implies that there is another benefit. One of them could be bringing jobs into the community does perhaps reduce trips from outside. People living local now, they're not having to drive in. So my suggestion always is that prior to waiving a fee, that you get some analysis that shows that, look at those numbers, make the decision based on that analysis, on the number of trips generated and on the benefit, and how that benefit then goes back to the community in order to offset some of those costs.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that analysis needs to be done. You can't just say, oh, you're opening up a business, here, let's waive your fees.
Right.
But there has to be some sort of a study that can be presented to us. But I'd like for that to be in writing so that there is ease of doing it rather than, having to reinvent the wheel to get it done. So I don't know if that can be done in this process or maybe make that recommendation and have staff come back with the wording. But I think it's critical, because if we're trying to employ people in this county, we need to have, number one, houses they can afford, and number two, attract the business so that they are wanting to locate here.
Say something.
Mr. Chairman, there are 2 ways we can do that. We can bring back a general policy. I think that would be a really good approach. But effectively, what we'll probably do is end up reworking the development agreement language, and so that it focuses on individual developments and is tailored specifically to them.
So you're saying that instead of doing it through the impact fees, do it through the development agreement?
The impact fee is setting a ceiling, and then individual projects would come in at that ceiling or demonstrate benefit to the community that would lessen the impact and qualify them for a lower fee. But that would be demonstrated based on the location, the type of project, cost of housing, for example, number of jobs created, and so on.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, if I may ask this question, and Brent, do you think that the wording that is on this now would allow us the flexibility to do that?
I believe so.
Because I know there have been businesses that have, I can give you a prime example on Fairview Road that wanted to do this, and I know that we gave some concession. But can we take it one step further and really look at what they're bringing? I don't believe that they ever presented us with any kind of study because it wasn't written that they could. And so
I don't know the particulars of that case. Well, I guess what I would recommend is that the board, if they choose, act on the proposal that's before you, and we will staff will bring back a set of policies that speak to the individual types of impacts and the mitigations, not in the CEQA context, but the mitigations that would qualify for lower fees. And we'll have you look at those, discuss those, and perhaps adopt those, and then it'll be clearer to everyone.
Yeah, I would like to do that. If we could do that and be very diligent about bringing those as quickly as possible. We're trying to set the tone for bringing in businesses. This is the time to do it.
And that will then provide us guidance for the third step, which would be the development agreement or the individual action on a subdivision map or a zone change or whatever that is specific to a project.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from members of the board?
I'm in complete support of that and develop language where, I have a business that's going to have a very large expansion as well, and this could be a deal killer unless we have some way to, kind of waive some of these impact fees. There are great jobs, there are great tax revenue that is above and beyond impact fees. This is a lousy way to have revenue. I'd rather have the improvement, property tax, ongoing employed people spending money here. That's good revenue. And we do have a little bit lower rate of fee for multi-family units, so hopefully density could help there, and that is a little bit lower rate for multi-family units. And, Highway 25, we're still working on that, Supervisor De La Cruz, as far as, studying alternatives.
Thank you.
Supervisor Munzer.
And I just want to reiterate that this all came about because we realized that we had taken 25 off the constraint list to lower our impact fees to stimulate the economy back in the height of the recession. The economy has turned around. We need to have funding to pay for Highway 25. And I totally agree that we need to have concessions when a business comes in to help them. But we also need these funds. So if we give them concessions, that concessions has to be offset by something else.
Right.
So I just, i.e. the development agreement or whatever. But we need to generate these funds if we hope to ever do anything with Highway 25.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and I, the comments I have is I think all the points are well taken, and I think that we just have to work through staff, and once we get those policies, then we can have that discussion at our board and see what works or what doesn't work. Because I agree with Supervisor Munzer, we certainly need the money, but I think that if we can find a way to recoup those funds and those concessions, but certainly the aspect of providing affordable housing and the equitability of these fees is certainly something that is concerning. So.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Sarah De La Cruz?
Just to provide some comfort to Supervisor Barrios, Supervisor Bartello and myself, we had our meeting yesterday, and that was a topic of discussion that we had at length about any changes that we increase here. There's going to be some effect down the road. So, and affordability came into the discussion table, we both agree that we need to address that in the future, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Okay, at this time, I'm going to open up to the public. Mr. Clerk, are there any speaker cards for this item from the public?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Marty Richmond asked to speak on this item.
Okay. Mr. Richmond.
Just as an aside, I wanted to pass out one change to the proposed resolution.
Okay.
I just added some language that if just some legal language that doesn't make a significant change to the resolution. I passed out copies to the back, and also to clarify that the fee report is also going to be attachment 1 or exhibit 1 to the resolution.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Mr. Richmond.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Marty Richmond from Hollister. I read a lot of these reports because I read a lot of them from a lot of cities and counties that are outside our jurisdiction to see how we stack up. I like to do comparative analysis, and I want to make some comments on this particular report. This is one of the best written reports. This has nothing to do with whether or not I can make the numbers jive, because I don't have the wherewithal to do some of the number crunching. I don't know how much it should cost a mile to build a road, okay, like the professionals do. But this is one of the clearest reports on how systemic impacts work, how they're offset, how the cost of impact fees is established, and why they are there and how they are there to be used. And I like to, through the chair, speak to the public and say I often get a lot of questions because I come to a lot of meetings about impact fees. And if you want to really know, this one's online on your agenda. There's a link to it. You should read this report, because when you get finished reading this report, you will have gotten a lesson, a very understandable lesson on how impact fees work and exactly how they should, I think, in an excellent fashion, be laid out, what the intention is for these funds. This map that shows exactly what's going to be done with the funds and what it's for and how it's systemic. In other words, what I'm saying is what I said in one of my recent articles, which is impact fees are designed so that people will pay their own way. So if the folks in the community are up with pitchforks yelling new housing doesn't pay their own way, maybe they should point their pitchforks at the people who do not keep the impact fees current. And that is not the developers, that is both the city and the county, whose job it is to keep it current. And you can see what a difference it makes if it's current, if it's understandable, if it's logical, and if it's current. And if it is, then people pay their own way, because that is the definition of an impact fee. It has to be 100%. The second thing is, we all know, I think, that a mile of road in California is way overpriced, and therefore the developers themselves, who often have assets we can't get to, which are non-government assets for building roads, can make those improvements cheaper. And we ought to make sure when we do development agreements, we say, just how many of these improvements can you make for us, rather than giving us the money and having us go through the entire governmental process of getting this thing improved. Plus, it gets done earlier rather than later. Thank you for your time.
No other comment cards, Mr. Chair.
Richard Gallagher again with the county parks. My question would be, is there a dedicated turn lane and to get back on and off of Union Road into San Justo Reservoir? Is that part of the plan? Great.
There is a turn lane there.
Good response.
Ross?
Nice plug.
Wasn't meant to be funny.
Thanks for letting me speak. Of course, as economics person, I thought this was really detailed and thought it was really well done too, assuming it's all accurate, and I'll have to assume that it is because the professionals did it. The only thing I thought that came to mind was the frustration factor of the 18 additional stops and turns and lanes that you have to that slow down traffic. I mean, part of the paying for the road itself, people understand that they have to pay an impact fee, but if the fee creates a frustration to get from the Fairview side of town down to out to 25 with additional stops through Fairview, there's 3. Through the 25 area. Remember, we built the bypass to stop the stops. And though it had an impact on downtown, and that's unfortunate, but the fact of the matter is it still remains that people who live here have to get to the other side of town. When they live up at Ridgemark, when they live up that direction, if you can't turn and go fly down Fairview at a decent rate, or you can't get down to over through the bypass and out, regardless of even safety factors. We have to consider safety, but you can't go overboard with it because it just becomes a pain. One of the reasons that a lot of people like to stay here after they got jobs in the Bay Area is because of the bypass. It was really terrible to go through downtown to get out, or to drive to Gilroy through Fairview. Adding stops is going to be frustrating. And that's the only back way in besides down through San Juan Bautista. So please keep that in mind. I'm not sure where the 18 stops came from and if they were really evaluated. I understand that the money looks like it has been really valuable, but I'm not sure if we could set aside the 18 stops and consider those later after we see how the roads are working. Could that be a separate idea? Remove it from this or remove it for consideration before this plan's approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. Are there any other members of the public who wish to provide comments? Please come forward. Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the board. Does staff have any additional comments?
If
board members?
if it pleases the chair, I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 2016-10 with the amended language that the council passed out to the board.
Is there a second? Okay, there is a second by Supervisor Munzer. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and move up item 22 next. I think the majority of the people in this room wish to hear that item. So I'll turn it over to our CAO. I know that this was an item requested to be put on our agenda by Supervisor De La Cruz. So if you have some comments as well, feel free to make some.
No, let Ray. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this was an item requested by your board to come to us, and today we're here. We have Sarah Fontano here. She's working out of our administrative office, and she is going to be discussing San Justo Reservoir, kind of giving us a progress report of where we're at with this. And she's invited some folks from other agencies to help us with this presentation. So I'll go ahead and pass this on to Sarah.
Pass it along.
Woo. Good morning, board members.
Morning.
Sarah Fontanos, Management Analyst for the County of San Benito. Prepared a report for you today, as your board requested several months back, to receive an update regarding eradication and recreation at San Justo Reservoir. I'm going to be discussing what staff has been working on, what we've been doing with the partners, hopefully give you a more detailed idea of what's been happening this past year or so. In addition to talking about some distinct differences we need to recognize with eradication and recreation and prevention and control plans. So with that, I first wanted to introduce the number of staff that's actually here today who are partners in this process. Dwayne, if you want to give a wave. Deputy Area Manager, Bureau of Reclamation. Carl Deely is not here with us today, but he is our assigned project manager for San Justo from Recreation. We have Alan Lindauer. Alan, if you want to wave your hand. Division Chief, Mid-Pacific Region, Operation and Maintenance. Jeff Catano, San Benito County Water District Manager. And Kelly Abajan, Environmental Scientist for California State Fish and Wildlife. These are a few of the people that I have monthly calls with, so I thought it would be important for them to be here. What I hope to do is provide this information to you and then open it up to discussion and questions of these partners to answer anything additionally, and then give it back to the board and public to discuss and ask further questions. So I thought it was important to first, in this collaboration, recognize the different missions that we're looking at from all the different groups involved. Obviously, from the county's perspective, our end game is recreation at San Justo. I think as many of the public would agree. So in trying to accomplish that on the county side, it was important to also understand some of the guidelines and principles kind of the group that I've been working with to get to that point. And in that, I recognize that San Justo Reservoir, not actually a designated recreation area, has the main primary authorization of water supply and water delivery, with recreation being secondary. So just recognizing that some priorities of the group were different than others. First priority for San Benito County as staff was recreation, while on the others had different ones which we've had to work out. So I think you'll see that kind of play out in what we'll discuss. And also wanted to emphasize that there absolutely is among the group the willingness to get to recreation. It's not solely one or the other. It truly has been a collaborative effort since NEPA has been completed. So that's what I wanted to talk about next. So I know that it's been a long time since 2008 when the reservoir was deemed closed. A lot of work was done by the Water District for CEQA, and other additional analysis and looking at different options for eradicating the issue. But further work and discussion really started when NEPA, the draft environmental assessment, was released back in April and May of 2015. On June 7th, U.S. Bureau of Reclamation staff actually approached the county to discuss recreation opportunities in the area again, even though we were still working on an eradication plan and working through the process. On August 31st, we actually had a public official visit to San Justo. Some of the supervisors may recall where the staff that I've mentioned who are here today were also present, in addition to technical specialists in regards to zebra mussels. In October, county staff and our team members started having monthly calls. Thank you, Kelly. She's been a wonderful facilitator from Fish and Wildlife to getting these calls together. And these calls have been extremely valuable. There have been several pieces of information that have come from talking to each other on a monthly basis and talking to each other before NEPA's release. We're not waiting for NEPA to come out to start addressing issues, especially in regards to the eradication plan.
Mr. Chair? Sarah, can you explain to the public why NEPA is so important and what's the purpose and why we have to do a NEPA?
Dang it, Supervisor De La Cruz. Can you get some help? Dwayne? Thank you, Supervisor. One moment. Thank you, Dwayne.
Can you hear me? The short answer is that it's the law. As a federal agency, we have to follow the law. If we don't do this, we would be violating the law. We have to look at the impacts of our actions. Just like the state agencies have to follow CEQA, we have to follow NEPA. And Jeff,
Mr. Chair,
yes,
maybe explain what NEPA is. Period, because we know, but the people in the public may not understand CEQA and NEPA. So tell us what NEPA stands for and what it is.
NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. It is the mirror of California's CEQA. It's what we have to do on a national level. We have to have a public process where we look at the impacts of our actions as a federal agency, and we have to disclose those to the public and use the process of looking at the impacts. We have to look at social justice, climate change, water resources to endangered species, biological resources, air quality, many of the same things that CEQA includes. And we use that as a process to try and minimize impacts. Example, if we have to build a pipeline through a wetland, is there a way to go through without disturbing the wetland? It's a try to minimize the impacts to the public and to the environment.
And not to hijack the presentation, because I want to hear the rest of the presentation, but the question will come out, why did it take so long to start NEPA to begin with? It's been closed for 8 years.
The answer is that we were doing things. The district was doing a lot of stuff during that time period. They did CEQA. Mm-hmm. They hired a consultant for, they've spent a couple $1 million, $2 or $3 million on doing a planning study, looking at how we could eradicate. They looked at everything from drawing the reservoir down to nothing, which is not possible, and looked at the large suite of alternatives of what could be done out there, and came up with one that said, this has a chance of being successful for eradication. And they did the hard work. Now we're doing a lesser, we have levels, we have categorical exclusions, we have EAs, environmental assessments, and EIS. And EIS is similar to the state's EIR, and the EA is similar to the NEGDEC. So because of all the work that the Water District did, we are capable of coming down with a much smaller document and not having to spend as much time and money on that. It has helped us out a lot because we have an idea of what will be successful, which is putting potassium chloride into the reservoir to kill the mussels.
Thank you very much for a complete answer. I appreciate it.
And I just want to, and you're involved because this is a federal facility, correct?
That is correct. We own the reservoir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. So let's see, back to our, so I was talking about the monthly calls that we've been having in the interim while we're waiting for NEPA to finalize the environmental assessment that Dwayne's talking about. And again, these phone calls have been very valuable, which I'll explain in a little bit, some of the details and conversations we've been having that have been moving this process forward in the meantime. So let's see. And then so as for this last arrow here, expected concurrence review, this is where NEPA is as of today. It's under a 30-day review, so we're hoping sometime this summer that NEPA will be coming out, which is an important note to have a little later on in the conversation. So as part of the conversations that started, you can imagine that after the years that have passed, a lot of new staff and new employees have been involved. And with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation approaching us, it was important to understand who the players of the game and what the game was. So we started in the very beginning of our conversations talking about roles and responsibility. And as Dwayne just mentioned, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation is the landowner. They are the NEPA lead. They are also the eradication plan lead. Determined that SBC Water District is the water operator and CEQA lead, which CEQA has been accomplished, and they're also responsible for FIFRA permits. The County of San Benito, as the recreation manager out there when recreation is present, will be the developer for the prevention or the control plan, and is the recreation plan lead. In addition to that, the county serves an important role in providing, opening the doors to different funding opportunities. It may or may not be clear that the federal government can't apply to their own federal grants, so that's where the San Benito County Water District and the County of San Benito can help step in as applicants, as well as any members of the public who wish to be grant writers and help me out through that process. That would be wonderful. And then, of course, California Fish and Wildlife, assisting with the eradication, prevention, and control plan. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, but kind of my approval, making sure I'm doing things right and according to state regulations. And also, California Fish and Wildlife would be involved in post-eradication monitoring. So just some of the things we wanted to make sure we kind of put down on paper and understanding where things would fall into place. So in regards to funding opportunities, another piece of the call was some really great help that we received from Fish and Wildlife and understanding what grants are available. With funding deadlines and, different baskets, I'll say, for grants, we've discovered that some grants are eradication only, some are capital only, others are prevention versus control only. So it's going to be very important, especially during the end of this conversation, when it is open to recreation, what are our funding sources? What are our ongoing funding sources to maintain recreation in the area? It's also important to understand that there's some that are set for the eradication process versus the ongoing and operation and maintenance later on down the road. We also, as part of our calls, discussed the report and understanding the process. A big piece of our calls monthly right now are the eradication plan. Again, that is not something we're waiting to complete for NEPA. We're working together actively now on addressing what the eradication plan could look like, thanks to the good work of CEQA from the Water District. What you're looking at now is the preferred route that we've been taking in creating an eradication plan, finding eradication funding, eventual implementation. Again, the NEPA process, as I mentioned, we're waiting for concurrence upon that. Do you want me to?
keep hijacking your presentation.
okay.
But maybe, I don't know, Sarah, maybe
Yes.
it needs to be stated why the eradication plan is so important. I don't know if Kelly is the right one to do that.
Sure.
But maybe we need to touch on why it's so important that the zebra mussel is eradicated and not spread to other bodies of water.
You bet. So whoever would like to speak can come up, but I can kind of start it. So in regards to recreation, it's important because the success of eradication is important for recreation becoming what it used to be in the past. So if we're successful 100%, then we're looking at a prevention plan rather than a control plan of knowing that a population would be there. And regionally, I think, Kelly.
Yeah, so number one, to follow what Dwayne said, it's the law. So Fish and Game has code that there's either a control plan in place or an eradication plan in place. The Bureau would like to proceed with eradication, so we must develop an eradication plan. It falls also into implementation. We need to spell out exactly how we're going to implement this eradication. So that's why the eradication is important. It's part of state law, and then it allows the agencies to move the eradication forward with an implementation phase.
I guess maybe my question is, why are the zebra mussels so dangerous? Why do
Okay.
they need to be eradicated?
Yes, so do I jump to why San Justo's unique?
Sure.
So San Justo is very unique in the fact that it is essentially offline. Its connectiveness to other bodies of water is very minimal. Some of the other infested reservoirs receive a constant influx of mussels because they're connected to several other infested water bodies. San Justo is not the case. The source water for San Justo is not infested. It's a small reservoir. It's one where eradication is entirely possible, and there's great risk if it's not eradicated that it could get into San Luis Reservoir, O'Neill Forebay, some of these other larger waters that are a hub for water in the Central Valley Water Project or the State Water Project, which you would be looking at impacts of millions of dollars once they're into a system as severe, as large as the CVP. Metropolitan Water District in Southern California operates 9 reservoirs. They've spent $30 million just in 5 years on control. San Justo is unique in the fact that they're able to lower the reservoir level, which desiccates. A lot of those mussels end up dying because of that. Several other reservoirs don't have the flexibility that the water district has to draw them down and significantly reduce a portion of the population. Every reservoir is unique in how it's able to operate and what the mandates are and their water releases. It's relatively a low impact here for the water district, but you can't then translate that impact to the other waters that are at risk, certainly not with something the size of San Luis Reservoir.
Mr. Chair? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand the concerns, and we all share the same concerns. But if we decide, the county decides to move forward, develop a program in which, like for fishing, recreational use, you allowed a vendor to be on place there, and any equipment, any fishing gearing will stay there. So if someone were to go recreational fishing there, they'll fish there and they'll return the equipment to the vendor. So that risk of that mussel moving somewhere else will not occur. Is that something that you guys are open to?
Well, number one, first we would need to see that plan. We would need to see what a proposed recreational plan looked like. We would need to see what the mitigation and management control measures were. So we're just kind of in the process. Since we were proceeding with eradication, that was the route we were going.
Not to interrupt, but what's the time frame you're looking at for full ratification in which it becomes recreational?
We will finish NEPA now this year. We're going to get an eradication plan this year. Then it's going to depend on funding. We do a 3-year cycle of funding, so we can ask for funding 3 years out, or we can go to the region or go to the department and seek funds from our budget from other purposes to do it at any time. But our progress is we need to get NEPA done, we need to get an eradication plan, have an idea of the cost so that we can approach Bureau of Reclamation and Department of Interior for funding for the eradication.
So let's move forward 4, 5, 6 years. $10 million has been spent. Is that 100% sure that it's going to be a complete removal of the mussel?
I don't know that you could ever say that without a doubt it's going to be 100% successful. Know that the agencies involved want it to be successful. We're doing everything we can possible to ensure it's successful. And the agencies all feel recreation is important and would like to have San Justo one day open to recreation.
That's the scary phrase you said. It's on one day. I mean, I need time frames. I got members of the community that have been waiting for 8 years trying to do recreational. And what I've been hearing so far is, a plan, ratification, funding mechanism, time, and then they make a determination, okay, it's recreation use now. So
I just think that's a difficult question. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to answer that or how any of us are supposed to answer that. We're on track with eradication. We're moving forward with the proper documentation. We have funding strategies. We're exploring recreation opportunities. We're looking at ways to minimize the risk. We're having the conversations. We're moving along with the documentation. I can't stand here right now and tell you on April 17th in 2020 it'll be ready to open for recreation. We can't give a specific date.
Yeah, and as one supervisor, I appreciate all the efforts that all the agencies are working together. I mean, we appreciate that. I appreciate it, and members of the community appreciate it too. It's just that we've been waiting for 8 years, and we're probably going to wait another 5 years. I mean, that's
all I can say is I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned funding, and I know that there's money collected when you go to recreate at a lake. There's money to address the mussel situation. And I don't know if DMV through boats and all, is that funding used for this kind of eradication?
Yes, Supervisor Barrios. So Department of Boating and Waterways, which is now part of state park system, they actually do have, through boating registration, it's set up for mussel prevention and control. My understanding right now, and Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, is because it's infested and there is no control plan currently, it's not under control or containment, those dollars don't yet apply. So it has to be a contained and managed reservoir in that regard. Uninfested and open to recreation. So we're uninfested currently, waiting for the eradication plan. So that's why it kind of glanced over funding opportunities and understanding those differences on the staff level so that we know what we can apply to and when, what's going to be important then.
Okay, and one more point, Mr. Chair, that I could make. Through RCRC, we have learned a lot about how these critters grow. And it is very critical. This is really important that I know that this has been a long process. I want it open. We've enjoyed it as a family. But the idea of how quickly these can grow, they can grow in a dime-sized pool of water, which is nothing. As much as we can monitor people going in there and not taking out their equipment, they still walk out with their boots. They still walk out with their raincoats. Children may walk out with toys that may have just a little bit of water with mussel in it. And to think that this could be infest, our dam, San Luis Dam, and the Lake Tahoe, all these areas that are very critical to the environment is huge. So we need to do it right. As much as I really want to open it, and I'm hoping that the process is working as quickly as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor Barrios.
So, Supervisor Barrios, I really appreciate that point because I think that doing it right the first time is absolutely essential. And what I'm hoping the board will understand at that point is eradication and the success of eradication will determine what recreation looks like out there, how limited it is. I know everyone has an idea. I never was there in the past, so I'm not sure of the experience out there, but I've heard wonderful things. But it's important to understand that now that it's infested, that could be severely limited. And it's dependent on how successful eradication is, if it's 100% or if it's a little bit manageable. And that's the difference between our control, where maybe all the mussels aren't completely gone versus prevention where they are absolutely gone. And that also significantly lowers the county's costs in regards to managing recreation out there. If we only have to control what's coming in and not also going out, it's a huge difference. So that on staff's part, there's been a huge support to help the Bureau and Water District as best we can to get them through the eradication process and really have the conversations about what order to do things in. So I discussed the different missions earlier between the Bureau and the county's priorities for recreation. And one point that we found in the conversation for the eradication plan is that best time to try to eradicate mussels is in August. Unfortunately, that is the worst time for the Water District to be draining their pools lower because of water supply. So we've actually had to renegotiate a different timing and looking at possibly October, a potential rainy season, and all the other variables that come in because we'd now be looking at a rainy season. And I'm just glad that we're not realizing that point later down the road after NEPA's done. So there are good things coming out of the conversation. And forgive me, partners, my job as an analyst is to provide options. And so there is the question of why not recreation now? Well, not even now, but prior to eradication. It is a possibility. I'm glad you're standing here. There are other processes that would be required of that. We're looking at NEPA, the potential of moving from an environmental assessment up to an environmental impact statement. And maybe Dwayne can explain this better. My concern and why I've been supportive of the one plan to the right is that you're potentially also splitting costs and workload of your own staff in two different directions. So imagine, two ongoing NEPA process to try to get eradication now, which maybe at the same time you're working towards recreation. It's, for me, kind of a waste of energy. Focusing it in one place is the better result, and as staff have been supportive of the partners. So I don't know if, Dwayne, you wanted to add anything about recreation prior to eradication and any concerns the Bureau might have?
Yeah, the concerns that the Bureau has is that as the owners of the Central Valley Project, which is tied in closely with the State Water Project, we're concerned about the spread of mussels. I believe that the economic value of agriculture in the Central Valley last year, or whenever last year that data is available, was $35 billion. And I believe I read somewhere, it might be in one of your slides further on, that control of mussels in bodies of water can upwards of $30 million a year. It's expensive. If we went with a control plan, I'm pretty sure the reclamation, we'd have to do NEPA on it because of the potential impacts to other bodies of water. It's really close to Silicon Valley, San Jose area, and they use a lot of water in their processes down there. So we'd have to see, how others would be impacted if we did a control plan, and what's the risk of the zebra mussels getting out. At a minimum, I think that we'd have public meetings, which, if we're having public meetings, would more than likely lead to an EIS, which is a long process and costs money also. So I don't know that it would speed anything up. I think that our most expedient path at this point, or quickest path at this point, would be through eradication, because we're nearly done with the plan and with the NEPA documentation.
So I think we've touched kind of throughout, given your questions, most of this. So I think that will wrap up our update in regards to staff work. So if there's questions, discussion.
So at this time, I'm going to pull the board. It's already noon. I know that we have 5 speaker cards, possibly some other cards. Do you guys want to finish this item, or you want to break for lunch?
I don't mind finishing.
It's already here, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
We're going to finish the item.
Do you have a question?
Eradication, done a lot of work through the years behind the scenes on this issue. I've met with the Bureau at least twice on different meetings, along with other supervisors and officials. And, if you read our agreement with the United States government, it clearly states that this is primarily for the reservoir is built to provide agricultural water and water for other uses. Recreation is secondary. I'm very encouraged by the progress that has been made. I know it's been taking a long time, and those people that like to fish, I've gone out there a number of times myself. I like fishing. But eradication, I don't know how you do it unless you dry up the reservoir. I've talked to potassium suppliers that, provide the materials to eradicate these zebra mussels. Unless there's something new, I don't think any of them will warranty that they get eradicated. So maybe this might be a water body that may be controlling it through raising and leveling the levels of the reservoir and through a monitoring program that is going to be very, very costly. And how we're going to pay for that, I guess maybe after the NEPA and the development of a program, we could take that and weigh it as a community if it's even worth doing. I don't know. But, the value of agriculture in this county is paramount. The investment that this county and the city of Hollister has made in water treatment facilities is tremendous, and jeopardizing that water source is a very serious issue. And I think I'm encouraged to see all the relative agencies working together, trying to find a solution. But, and I got to admit, it takes some guts to come up here and say we don't know when we're finished this process. But it's realistic, and I think, as a board member, I'm supportive of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As been expressed up here, I first want to state, getting San Justo open again for recreation is important to, I believe, all 5 members up here. But there's issues, and I put your other consultants on the spot, so I think I'll hit up Jeff now, call him up here if he will. And I just want to make sure the public, not only the ones that are here, but the ones that might be watching, I want them to understand what the importance of this reservoir is to the community besides the recreational part of it. And I'll kind of lead into where I'm going. And Supervisor Botello mentioned it. Everybody knows about the blue valves and how it is helping our ag industry. But I think what many people don't understand is that San Justo is a major source of water for the homes in the Hollister area through the Les Salt plant and through the new West Hills plant that is now being built. Jeff, if you just want to touch on that.
Yeah, certainly. So kind of just to step back a little bit and understand how the whole San Felipe project has affected this county in general. In 1987, the water levels within San Juan Valley were probably 150 feet lower than they are today. If without the Central Valley Project bringing that water into this county, we would have had a much more difficult time managing the drought that we're currently just getting through right now. Prior to entering into this last drought that we're in right now, our water levels in San Juan Valley and in most of the county in our basin the basin was basically full. You would have not had that condition without the Central Valley Project water coming in here. We'd have been, at 1987, it was 150 feet lower than it is today. You would have been lower, probably maybe 200 or 300 feet at that time, at this time now. So you would have had a very difficult time managing this drought. You'd have been in a situation much like the Central Valley is in right now because they're running out of water. The importance of that water system to agriculture and to the community is very important. The water district through the city and Sunny Slope County Water District are spending about $40 million on water projects to bring higher quality water to the city of Hollister residents. The San Justo Reservoir is absolutely essential in ensuring that during drought periods that we can weather that by storing water in San Justo. and that becomes that water supply for those water treatment plants to be able to get through those drought periods. In addition to the other things that the water district does to store water outside of the district and the agency. We have water that we store in water banks in the valley. We have exchange agreements that we have so that we do ensure that during drought periods that we can manage it. There will be shortages, but there will be manageable shortages. So that's absolutely important that facility is there, and its primary purpose is water supply. And that's what pays for the facility is the water supply benefits that's received. So, I mean, if that's if that's what you were looking for, and that's the situation, it's imperative. The risk that I want to make sure that we don't overlook, there is an incredible risk to not only the other agencies, but our water supply coming into San Justo if those zebra mussels get out of San Justo and infest San Luis Reservoir, the Delta, other water projects around California. Because the issue is it becomes difficult when those zebra mussels colonize. It becomes difficult to be able to deliver water through those systems because they plug the piping up and interfere with the ability to deliver water. If you ended up with zebra mussels in the Delta and you started having problems with infestations in the pumping plants, it would be huge because you'd have to take those pumping plants offline, clean them, spend a lot of money doing the maintenance and whatnot. So the bottom line is you'd still be able to deliver water. You might be able to deliver less water, but the cost of that water would be significantly higher. So ultimately, the end users are going to pay in one way or another for zebra mussels if they get out of San Luis or San Justo Reservoir, which is why all the water agencies around here have been so adamant about keeping San Justo closed until there is a suitable solution to that. If you went to a management plan where you went in to try to have recreational access during the period of time when there are zebra mussels in there, you're going to have a huge opposition from every water agency in Northern California that's going to come after that. They will step in and slow the process down, that if you think that 5 years is a long time to get an eradication process through, you'll be in there 10 or 15 years fighting these folks because they absolutely do not want to see that reservoir open. We're already getting comments, and Santa Clara Valley Water District is already writing letters to DWR about the fact that we're even talking about opening San Justo Reservoir up. So it's already happening. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right. I'm glad that this issue is on the agenda. We had discussed this issue, almost the same exact topic that the report that we got from staff is almost identical, and we got it about a year and a half ago. But in politics, there's this thing called short-term memory. We all get it, And so, but I'm glad it's here. I'm glad the residents are here because this is an educational process for everybody. And how this got started, I happened to get a call that said, "Hey, did you see that article on the Bonito link that talked about this?" Mayor Velasquez, local residents got together. It was one of those articles that gets your blood boiling, because you work on this issue for a few years. And like I said, short-term memory, people forget, the great lengths that this board has taken and staff has taken to make sure that we handle the situation at San Justo Reservoir. I know one of the quotes in the article, I have it here before me, Mayor Velasquez said, "At the end of the day, it's real simple. You either want to get it open or you don't," referring to the reservoir. And it is not really simple. With the short presentation that we had here goes to show the layers of complexity in getting San Justo Reservoir open. Because at the end of the day, you have 5 supervisors that want to open San Justo. You guys have our undivided attention. We want to get San Justo Reservoir, but as Supervisor Marjorie Bayo said, we have to get it open under the right circumstances, and we have to do the right thing, not only for our local residents, but for the region as well. Because, if anything, what we learned in the first few minutes of this presentation is that the recreational use of this facility is secondary. It has first, as we just heard, water and water delivery. That's the primary purpose of this reservoir. Aside from the fact that it's a federal facility, it's a federal facility. And I have some additional comments, but I'm going to wait until we hear from the public. So, are there any other comments from the board? Okay, so at this time, Mr. Clerk, I'd like to open up for some public comments.
Mr. Chairman, Richard Gallagher.
Hey, Mr. Gallagher, thank you for your patience. We're sorry you've been waiting.
Sure. You going to take me to lunch for this? Real quick, I guess, I don't know, I'm not the most educated person in the world, but I did hear that draining this would have got rid of it. Well, we were in a drought last couple of years, and I know we needed to save water, but if we would have drained it, probably we wouldn't be here talking about it. We'd talk about opening this place up. So I'm thinking maybe our next drought, we need to drain the darn thing. I don't want to see these mussels get into anywhere else, any other water source. My next issue would be, why can't the federal government, grant us that property so we can manage it? Because 8 years of studying this and study, we're still studying. And we should have graduated from high school by now. I'm part of the Parks Commission. I would really love to see this open. We need some recreation for our community, our youths. So again, I think we should, next drought we have, let's drain this thing. And if we can, maybe we can get the federal government to grant the county that property to us so we can make up our own minds. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher.
Dave Whirlin.
He left. He's the gentleman that came up after Mr.
Okay.
Gallagher.
Mayor Velasquez.
Mr. Chair and supervisors, my blood is boiling. No disrespect, Mr. Botello.
None taken.
Your comment of takes courage not to have an answer or for government not to have an answer. That's what government does. It never has an answer. We make a lot of excuses in government, and we tell people what we can't do, and then we ask them for more money not to do it. This is very frustrating. I had a lot of hope today. There's a lot of people in the community that want to see this change and use it for recreation. I think Marty Richmond had one of the best comments when he pointed out that we won World War II in 5 years, and we're still talking about the zebra mussels 8 years later. Let me let you in on something. This is not going to open in 5 years. It's not going to open in 8 years, and the state's not going to pay for it, nor the federal government. And we're going to be talking about it, and we're going to talk about the history of the days of fishing or recreation in San Justo. It is up to all of you to understand you're the leaders. You are the elected officials. That's why you got into government. At some point in your life, you were fed up. You wanted to cut through some red tape. Now you are the elected officials, and you're wrapped in the red tape. Let's understand we have two options here, eradication and control. We can control this. We can put the plan together to allow us to use this facility. Our kids deserve it. Our community deserves it. It's part of who we are. Yeah, I went out there the other day to go look at it. I want to thank Jeff for allowing me out there. And it's beautiful. I hadn't been out there in 10 plus years. And to see it being wasted, yes, it's holding water, but our community is losing out. Are we going to build something else? What are we going to do? Just keep saying no and keep waiting for more studies to be done? When do we understand it is us that makes that decision? Our community deserves this, and we need to cut through this red tape. We need to put a plan together. We don't need to bring boats from out of town. We can rent the boats there. We can rent the equipment. What do you think is going to happen if we talk about this for 8 more years? If the state is so concerned, if I was governor, I would close that place off, have it patrolled, drain it, get rid of the problem before it got to San Luis. If we're that concerned about it, we need to be doing something about it now, before it spreads and costs the state millions and millions of dollars. If it's that much of a priority, shouldn't the state be taking care of this already? They're not going to. They're going to wait. This problem is going to spread throughout the state, And somebody's going to say, wow, we should have done something at San Justo. Be the leaders. Stand up. Let's put together a recreational plan to let the public use our facility. We paid for it. It's our tax dollars that paid for it. It's time we use it. It's time we stand up, put our words into action. Let's not accept this any longer. We can get that used quickly. Please be the leaders. And I want to hear today your votes on it so the public can understand.
We have Anita King.
Hello, I'm Anita Kane. I'm here representing REACH, the local nonprofit for recreation, exercise, and community health. And we're an advocate for outdoor recreation in San Benito County. And my question is, would there be some consideration if the fishing aspect is not a possibility until the eradication takes place? Might there be instead some way to open it to hiking, bird watching, wildflower viewing, just enjoying the outdoors, aside from the fishing aspect? Might there be a fence control that could limit access to the reservoir while the eradication takes place, but still allow the public to access for recreational use aside from fishing? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and in the interest of time, I will get an answer for you. I'll work with staff to get a response to it.
And the last one is William Jacinto.
Hi, I'm really disappointed, and I totally understand why we have to be concerned about all the water issues and the spread of the zebra mussels. And I had a bunch of other stuff ready to say and said, well, let's do this or let's do that. After hearing the presentations, and it really clarified what the position that San Benito County is in. And there's got to be some liability there somewhere. If they get out of that dam, the state's is going to turn on us, and you know it, and I know it, and they're going to want us to pay for it. So it's probably going to be 8 years. It's going to be just like Hernandez Dam. We paid for that. Can't even go in there. Pacheco Dam. We paid for that. Can't go in there either. Why can't we open one of these two dams and work with the landowners and getting access or something, and let's go another route. That way, at least we have a place to go, and get to use lakes and reservoirs that we paid for, and we have no access to. I'm sure it's within your power to work with landowners and to come to some kind of an agreement. So we have alternatives. We could start. I know we're not. There's a situation with the steelhead. That's down in Pacheco Creek. But there's no reason why we can't go in there. I know it's surrounded by private property. So is San Justo. I think that if we start looking for alternative places, and who knows, I think there's a lake over by Best Road too. That may be another alternative. Let's look for other places so we can go fishing and take our kids fishing, take our grandkids fishing, enjoy the outdoors. But let's look at opening some of those doors. Because, just sitting here and go, oh, well, it's going to be another 12, 15 years. Well, that's just not acceptable. Let's look at alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacinto. Are there any additional speakers? Ms. Ross? We always save Marty for last.
Thank you for letting me speak, members of the board, supervisors. I'm coming in from the other side, saying that I'd like to compliment the leadership of the Board of Supervisors. The mission of what we elect you to do is and the mission statement recognizes that the board is supposed to recognize the honesty, integrity, and respect for the individuals that comes to you. But a broader picture is that we elect you to hold the trust and maintain the community in our best interest. I wish more people that argued we should jump the fence and break the law and go up to the reservoir were here so they could hear this presentation. Unfortunately, just like a lot of other issues, people don't educate themselves, they just want to complain. Taking the time to do a thorough analysis and a thorough review of what we can and cannot do was an absolutely wonderful way to go. The reservoir is a fishing hole and a place to hike. Clearly, there's got to be other places to go. Fremont Peak, but it's a beautiful environment we have. That's not the only place. And the mussel problem is so huge that even if you leave with a tiny bucket of water or a water glass or a mussel on your shoe, it's spread. The potash solution for $3 million isn't a sure thing. The potash can't get everywhere. Draining it isn't a full solution. We don't know if it'll dry up all behind all the nooks and crannies. They're tiny little mussels. So we have to be absolutely certain that we've addressed the problem, taken care of it before we go fishing. It seems like it's a small part of the community that's angry because they've complained so loud and people want change and people want to make a dramatic aspect of it. I don't see where that should change our minds at all, or your minds at all, about what's right. Our leaders are here to protect the environment and protect us. And and you guys I believe, have a duty that beyond the county of San Benito to make sure that the San Luis Reservoir doesn't get infected, which is the obvious next step, and that would be billions and billions of dollars and a lot of problem. Final note is, for goodness sakes, we're almost always in a drought. We've had a good year. But why in the world would we be messing with, and even if you have to sit there and have a picnic and drop a potato chip in the water, why are we messing with our drinking water at all? Go someplace else. Beautiful ocean. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. Mr. Richmond?
Marty Richmond from Hollister. Here's my problem. If we really think we're ever going to open it up for recreation, then we should be doing a control plan right now, because if I could snap my fingers and make all the zebra mussels go away tomorrow, and you made me emperor, I would say nobody goes in there and nobody comes out of there unless we already have a control plan, because obviously it got infected the first time somehow, and I wish we could find the person who did that, and hopefully they're a billionaire so we could sue them. But so this is, there's an old saying, people vote with their feet. What it really means is, don't listen to what they say, look at what they do to see what the real intention is. And since no one is working on a control plan while we're working on an eradication plan, the truth of the matter is it's never going to open up again. If you really intended to open it up again, even if it was eradicated tomorrow, you would be working on a control plan today. Otherwise, it's going to be 8 years 5 years to get it eradicated, and then we're going to wake up in the morning and say, okay, it's all gone, and now what? Oh, we want to do recreation. Okay, that'll be a control plan, and that'll take another 6 years to get written and approved and go through the same process. So there's a bit of, I don't want to use the word dishonesty, but I can't find a better word at this time. I don't want you to take it the wrong way. There's a bit of unbelievability here. Okay, if you really intend to open it up, you'd be working on a control plan today, even if you said we're never going to open it up until the eradication takes place. And if you don't intend on opening it up ever again, then you ought to bite the bullet and tell everybody, and let's quit playing around. So now my other problem is, no matter what I think about that, I'm no big chance taker. I don't want to take a chance of zebra mussel infection everywhere. However, I'll hold to my guns. The idea that it takes 8 years and it's going to take 5 more years is ridiculous to get the eradication plan through. I don't care, okay? We do a 3-year budget and whatever. That's ridiculous, okay? It can't take that long. Time is money. We cannot have people in the government, and I hope the people who work for the government, I worked for it for more than 20 years. I think I earned my money as a government worker. But there are people in government who essentially say, well, we don't have enough people, so this becomes a career project. We've got to get moving. If we want to do things, if you think the mussels are a threat, they are a threat today. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other local residents who'd like to speak on this topic? Okay, if not, I'll bring it back to the board. Sarah?
If I might just add one last comment for the board. I think the board members recognize as a management analyst the different hats I wear, and I really pride myself in time management. Just because, and what everyone's talking about, this control plan or recreation plan that we're discussing, just because there's not a draft in hand right now doesn't mean that there isn't a right timing to know that when NEPA's ending and when I need to know when that draft needs to be completed by. We're well aware of that. All these limitations to recreation that the board and public is talking about, ability to hike, maybe we don't want to use the water, we just want to have a picnic, maybe we're having rentals only. That is the recreation or control plan that everybody's talking about. And just want to emphasize that there is a sweet spot with the NEPA process direction we're going to have that control plan in place, and we're well aware of it. So it's not that we're not looking to ever open again.
Thank you, Sarah. I want to thank you for an outstanding presentation, bringing in light what we're up against. And the agencies that took the time to come down, spend all morning to kind of bring some realistic viewpoint, what we're challenged with. It's not that simple. We want recreation in this county. This board has spent a lot of money trying to promote its recreation program. And what we have is a regional park that the city of Hollister, I see a couple of council members here, let's work together. Develop a park that maybe has a fishing hole in it where you could take your kids and walking trails. And there's plenty of land to do so. Unfortunately, with San Justo, there's a lot of work and a lot of time that's going to be consumed trying to figure out that future. Today, we have an area. Let's work there. Let's put our money there on something that may not work in the long term. So that's my message. And for those that like fishing, I like I said earlier, I like fishing. I go to McAlpine Lake right now, right outside San Juan Bautista. They stock it. It's ideal for kids. Try that. And I'm not saying we give up on San Justo. Let's keep working hard. San Bernardino County needs to stay as a partner and work with the Bureau of Reclamation and the Water District and see after NEPA what kind of project we could put together and go from there and see what the funding is like. That's where I'm at.
Thanks, Supervisor. Supervisor Munzer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The speaker that brought up Hernandez Reservoir, that was something that happened, I think, before any of us were really old enough to have effect on it. And I've always felt that was a crime, the way that came about, that the taxpayers were sold a bond, as I understand, the land was purchased, the reservoir was built, and then the land bordering the reservoir was sold off. And because at the time somebody decided that residents of Hollister wouldn't want to drive all the way down there anyway to fish. Like I said, I've always felt that was a crime. This is a little bit different. I'm up at the reservoir, every so often. I've seen the backside where Homeland Security money has been spent. I believe it's K-Rails, I can't really remember right now, blocking the back dam because they were concerned about terrorism and an attack on that dam even though it's small. Back when terrorists were flying into buildings, they were concerned. We had a presentation that Sarah arranged for us. Supervisor Bertello and I were there. The sheriff was there, and he was in the room, and he left again. But not bioterrorism, eco-terrorism. Thank you. Yeah. Was brought up, and I talked to him afterwards. He was very concerned about that. Somebody could have the ill intention of going in there, getting sufficient amount of water, removing it, and affecting these other water bodies in the state to the tune of the millions and billions of dollars that was discussed today. And how would we stop that if the reservoir was open again? So all these things have been discussed. Is what has been weighing on us. Somebody, maybe Marty, brought up, I wish we knew who infected that reservoir, because I would like to go back after them. But apparently, if any of these zebra mussels get out into any other body of water in California, they're going to be able to figure out where those zebras came back, and they're going to be coming after us, as it was brought out also, because there is potential litigation involved in this, and the County of San Benito could be on the hook for it. With all that said, as I said earlier, I am wanting to have that facility open again for recreation. And I would ask staff to bring back a funding analysis for a control plan, i.e. recreational plan, as soon as possible. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Munzer. Supervisor Marjorie Barrios.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Munzer, that is a great plan. I will support it. It's good to hear that there is a control plan, recreation plan, that we're not waiting for NEPA, like you said, for them to make their plan or decision. But I say let's not drop the ball. Let's do what we are doing now and make sure that we're proactive, we're assertive, and let's take those agencies to task and say, we're waiting. Give us the answers. Do it sooner than later, and just not drop it. We know how it's important to the community. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor De La Cruz.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Chair for allowing to put this item on the agenda for staff and Sarah. Thank you very much, and for the members of the federal and state government and the Water District being here and informing the public on the status and the update of the San Justo Lake. I had a lot of members of my district talk to me and saying, you hold the power to opening up that lake, open it up. And I tried to explain that it's not as easy. We needed members of outside the community that come and talk to the community that this is the status. And in fact, Mr. Bill, he spoke earlier. Bill Cento spoke earlier, and he's actually one of them that him and I have been talking for about 5 years on the status of San Justo. And thank you, Bill, for being here. I do appreciate it. But at the same time, I too want to have that open up for recreational, and I think if direction is to do a recreational plan, then I'm on for it too. I will support your position, Supervisor Munzer, and work on it, and ASAP, because I guess the public is tired of waiting 8+ years and another 5 years. So maybe this can speed up the process, and we'll get a true cost of what's going to cost, and maybe we can have the City Holster, San Juan, and San Benito County and the Water District come in and work together as a partnership on how to fund this and how to develop this plan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor. And, in reference to the control plan or a recreation plan, a couple points that I had written down prior to this agenda item was in my support for such a plan was understanding the feasibility and really the realistic options in creating such a plan. Will such a plan or options require federal state approval? We all know that they'll require some level of a federal approval, and so understanding that process and educating local residents and even our board as to how long that process is going to take is important. And then finally, associated costs to our county and to our taxpayers, because in the end we can go through all of this and realize this is a price tag we can't afford. But those are things, I think, especially the cost is something that will come to light as we start to develop a plan. And one other point I wanted to make, I made reference to this article, it got my blood boiling. And one point that hasn't been discussed, and I want to close this item with it, is the mayor was quoted in trying to advocate for some pointers as a campaign to get the reservoir open. The article states if they don't open the gates, what should we do next? What would happen if 100 people showed up with their fishing poles and jumped the fence? You think the sheriff is going to arrest 100 people? Velasquez intimated that the sheriff would most likely not take action. Let me repeat that. Velasquez intimated that the sheriff would most likely not take action if the group included supervisors and 2 hopeful politicians. Without a big enough group, they can pick us off, he said. A big enough group changes all the dynamics. The sheriff won't want to get into the middle of it. All the feds, are the feds going to do something about it? I would hope the feds would do something about it. I think if the Occupy Oregon taught us anything, is that when you resist the federal government, people can get hurt, as I believe a couple people died in that whole fiasco up north. Would our sheriff get in the middle of it? Absolutely, I hope that the sheriff would uphold the Constitution he swore an oath on and would arrest all people that broke the law. And the only thing I have to close this is, above all, we must approach this issue with absolute responsibility. And I refuse to endorse a militant call to arms, coordinated fence jumping, coordinated trespassing, and blatantly breaking the law will provoke only chaos in San Benito County. And it will ensure that nothing will ever get done, or certainly it will make our jobs of making some progress at this reservoir very difficult to achieve in working with all the partners that we need to work with. And so with that, I want to thank all the residents for being here. I want to thank the board. And with that, we'll close this item. Are there any other comments from the board? No. Okay.
Thank you to
Thank
staff.
you. And yes, I really want to thank staff for the great presentation and for the other agencies that were here.
Thank you.
So we're coming back at 1:30?
Mr. Chair, we have a time frame here. We have our next speaker has to leave, so we're hoping that the board can stay for this one last item before
we
lunch.
can take an hour for lunch.
An hour for lunch after. Hopefully, it's okay with the board. And that's still our public hearing, item 21. So
yeah, let's
take
take 5
a
minutes
5 minute
and then
break.
we'll come back.
That'd be great. Thanks.
And Ray, these 2 items on my computer were...
Excuse me.
No, Shirley. Byron, excuse me.
So in June of 2014, the county received application for the Sunnyside Estates vesting tentative map, a general plan amendment, and zone change. In January 2016, the San Benito County Planning Commission recommended approval of the zone change and the EIR certification. I wanted to point out I mentioned the general plan. The general plan has changed as part of the county's general plan amendment. It's the 2035 general plan land use designation identifies it as residential mixed. This designation allows mixed-use developments that include residential, retail, and office uses, and allows single-family density up to 20 units per acre. The item before you today is the zone change, and as well as the environmental impact report. The project is intended to result in a 200-lot subdivision. So in order to accomplish that, the zoning needed to be changed from the existing ag productive to the proposed R1. This does conform to the residential mixed 2035 general plan land use designation. And as you can see, the surrounding properties are residential and agricultural uses. There has been some significant other development proposed for this area as well. This is the first one that we've processed, however. At this point, I will turn it over to Josh Janowitz from Rincon Consultants to get into some of the details of the project summary.
Thank you, Byron. The project includes 200 lots and 200 corresponding residential units on approximately 44 acres, with an average density of approximately just under 5 units an acre. The lot sizes would be approximately 5,800 square feet. And in addition, the applicant is proposing to develop 5.3 acres of parks and recreation. The roads and other ancillary facilities make up the balance of the project development area. Off-site improvements are also proposed along Southside Road, and interior infrastructure improvements include improvements to the water delivery system, the wastewater conveyance system. There is a sewer lift station proposed along the northern portions of the site, and also there are significant drainage improvements proposed on site as well. This project required the preparation of an environmental impact report, whose purpose is to inform the decision makers about potentially significant environmental impacts, to identify mitigation measures, to prevent significant unavoidable damage to the environment, and obviously to provide the public with an opportunity to comment on both the project and the environmental document that was prepared. The environmental impact report process started with the preparation of a notice of preparation, which was issued in September of 2014. The scoping meeting was held shortly thereafter. The draft environmental impact report was circulated in October of 2015 for the requisite period of 45 days, and the final EIR was released in January of 2016. All the environmental issue areas were addressed as part of the environmental analysis, as well as direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts. Within these environmental issue categories, Class 2 impacts were identified under aesthetics, ag resources, biological resources, cultural resources, geology and soils, hazards and hazardous materials, transportation, and utilities. And what I mean by Class 2 is those were impacts that could be mitigated after the imposition of mitigation measures. There were also significant unavoidable or Class 1 impacts identified as part of the project due to changes in the visual character, converting the project site from agricultural use to a residential use, the impacts associated with agricultural resources due to conversion of the ag land to residential uses. Greenhouse gas emissions were also found to be significant and unavoidable due primarily to the additional traffic that would be generated and as well as the energy use that would be provided. There is a significant or substantial mitigation program that is required to mitigate greenhouse gases, but due to the cumulative nature of the issue, it remains significant and unavoidable. Significant and unavoidable impacts also would result during construction of the proposed project. So on a temporary basis, we found that the existing residents would be impacted during demolition, grading, and construction for a period possibly longer than 12 months. With respect to alternatives, the EIR evaluated a reasonable range of alternatives, specifically the no project, no development alternative, the build-out under existing land use and zoning. We looked at an alternative that considered an increased setback along the northern property line to potentially reduce conflicts between ag uses and future residential uses. And also, we looked at a reduced density alternative. The alternatives analysis examined each environmental issue area in comparison to the proposed project and briefly discuss the alternatives that were rejected. The reduced density and build-out under existing zoning were considered the environmentally superior alternatives. However, they did not meet the project objectives, and therefore staff concluded that when compared to the proposed project, the project as mitigated provides a reasonable balance between satisfying the project objectives and reducing significant impacts to an acceptable level. The final EIR, again, as I mentioned, was released in January of 2016 and addressed comments that were received from Caltrans. As a result of this comment letter, we did make minor revisions to the draft EIR to clarify the Caltrans intersection significance criteria, to clarify the traffic impacts at the Union Road Airline Highway intersection, and mitigation measure timing. These amendments serve to merely clarify and strengthen the content of the EIR, and therefore recirculation was not required. The 2035 General Plan land use element requires that each project demonstrate that it will be fiscally neutral or have a positive impact on the county. As a result, staff met multiple times with the project applicant, and we've worked with the applicant to develop conditions of approval requiring the payment of all required impact fees and the formation of any special financing districts prior to the issuance of building permits. For board consideration, this condition has been added to a red line version of the ordinance, which was included in your packet under a separate cover, and this updated ordinance is also provided in the back for any members of the public who are interested in reviewing this ordinance. But in essence, with the imposition of this condition, staff feels like this project would result in a fiscally neutral project. And in closing, I'll hand it back to Byron just to wrap up, and then obviously we are all available for questions. Thank you very much.
So this has been thank you, Josh. This has been a team effort between planning, public works, now RMA, and the county counsel's office, as well as our consultants and the applicants throughout the whole process. The environmental impacts have been reduced to the greatest extent feasible. The project is located within an area of the county identified for future growth per the 2035 general plan, and the addition of the conditions in the amended ordinance that will ensure fiscal neutrality in the future. So it's staff's recommendation at this time that you conduct the public hearing regarding the environmental impact report and zone change petition 14-181, that you review the administrative record and the Planning Commission's recommendations set forth in Planning Commission Resolution number 2016-01, that you review and consider the zone change petition number 14-181, that you adopt the resolution, which is attachment C to your staff report, certifying that the EIR evaluates the impacts of development of the Sunnyside Estates project prepared pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act and the county's local CEQA implementation procedures, adopt findings required by CEQA, adopt mitigation measures to reduce any significant environmental impacts where feasible, as recommended in the EIR, and adopt a mitigation monitoring and reporting plan, and adopt the statement of overriding considerations, and, number 5, adopt the ordinance as amended, approving and adopting the zone change from the existing zoning map from agricultural productive AP to single-family residential R1 to ensure consistency between the county code and the project based on the findings and conditions of approval reflected in the board resolution and as recommended by the Planning Commission in Planning Commission Resolution number 2016-01. So I and the rest of the team is available for any questions. Pending the map, this is about the zone change, not about the map. If the zone change is approved today, the map will then go to the Planning Commission for their review and approval, and that is also where the bulk of the conditions of approval will be placed on the project. So we're available for questions.
Are there any questions of staff? Supervisor Barrios.
Yeah, and Byron, so the conditions of approval then with the map at what point does a development agreement come into play?
There is no development agreement for this project. It was discussed at one point, but there is no ordinance requirement for a development agreement, right, and the applicant did not wish to enter into one.
Okay, well, I'm just, I made the points earlier about affordable housing. Is there any way that they can maybe, as they go through the map, maybe build smaller units for affordability by design? Those things are really critical. So I was hoping that maybe that conversation would take place. I'm always concerned about ag to residential, so I just want you to talk a little bit about what that ag is being used for right now. And I believe nothing. So I want to make sure that that's addressed so that the community knows that this is not a flourishing ag, property.
Yeah, I'll let, there's some significant mitigation measures and conditions regarding the ag conversion. I'll let Josh go ahead and.
Yes, that's right, Supervisor Barres. The site currently it's working. The site currently is fallow and has been used over the last 5 or 6 years. Has been used only for hay production.
Uh-huh.
The site used to have a robust walnut orchard and was a significant producer of walnuts, but since 2006, that use has been discontinued and essentially is just used for low-intensity hay production at this point. So, again, not a flourishing sort of Class 1 type agricultural production piece of property, and therefore, I think as a result, that's why the county's consultant and the county determined that the residential mixed was the appropriate land use designation for the site, which does allow, obviously, residential and a number of other uses.
Okay, and that's what makes me feel comfortable moving forward with this, is that it isn't a flourishing ag piece of property that is productive even at this point for vegetables and things of that sort. And the only other concern that I have is that I know that talking to the schools, it's not part of the what would you call it, environmental impacts, but it is going to bring 300 students per our average child per house. Is there any discussion with the schools for planning on how you're going to address? I'd like to know. I certainly, this has been talked about at intergovernmental, where the developer never really talks to the schools and vice versa. They don't know what's going on, and all of a sudden they have 300 kids that they have to house. So is there any plan to discuss that or to at least let them know?
We did notify the school district that this project was pending, and that started as part of the actual notice of preparation process. We received one letter actually very late in the process from the school district, which identified some of those concerns about funding. The issue, though, with respect to school Sorry. Maybe I need to speak directly into the microphone. Sorry about that.
There you go.
We consulted with the school district early in the process. Hopefully this is better. Consulted with the school district early on in the process. We didn't receive actually anything from the district during the initial notice of preparation time frame, but we did receive a letter late in the process that expressed some concerns about school funding. We did analyze impacts to schools as part of the environmental impact report. There is actually a section in the guidelines which require consideration of school impacts. We did identify these as potentially significant and do require that the applicant pay the required school fees pursuant to SB 50, which does limit or essentially establish the payment of fees as acceptable mitigation to impacts to schools. And I know that the county is also going to be looking at this issue if and when it receives future applications for development in this area. So we feel confident that with the payment of fees, their impacts can be reduced to a less than significant level, and it's an issue that the county and the city will continue to deal with if and when future applications are submitted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other?
I'm pretty concerned about the development agreement requirement we have for some, and for some we don't have it. I think we have to be very, very consistent as these projects move forward, and spell out, what the benefits are to the county.
Excuse me for interrupting you, Supervisor Patel. I just want to make clear there is no requirement that any applicant enter into a development agreement at the moment under our current ordinances. Entering into a development agreement the way our current ordinance is structured is purely voluntary if the applicant is willing to provide some services or some benefits to the county over and above what normally would be required. So the projects where we have had a development agreement has been because the applicant has voluntarily agreed to enter into the development agreement with the county. Obviously, they've gotten something out of it. We've gotten something out of it. In this particular case, early on, we did have a discussion with Mr. Brigantino and Mr. West about entering into a development agreement with the county. They chose not to do that. We have no legal way to force them into doing that. So.
Well, and that comes back to at the retreat when I said the M word, and for those, that's the moratorium word until we have this all worked out, because affordable housing is absolutely critical. We're allowed 200 houses come in. Not one of them will be affordable to a policeman or a fireman in this county or someone that's in the building trades. I also think it's useful to know when the park is developed. At what phase? Is it after the 100th building permit? That's a big part of a community, is to have the park. And, we without some of these things really spelled out, I don't know how we could say everything's neutral to, the people that live here already.
So if I could respond to those concerns, there will be a very lengthy and detailed list of conditions that are recommended to the Planning Commission to be adopted along with approval of the vesting tentative map. And a lot of those issues will be fleshed out that way. The requirement that this project be fiscally neutral was written into the project description and project objectives, and will be formed into part of the conditions of approval. I don't know how far along the drafting of those has come yet, but I mean, most likely along the lines of other similar projects recently, that they would form a CFD to ensure the fiscal neutrality elements. The affordable housing issue is not something that has been discussed, but we could raise it with the Planning Commission as a potential condition of
and
approval.
contrary, Ms. Murphy, the Planning Commission has raised that as an issue. I've raised that as an issue. I think other board members have, and I'm scared to death that we're going to have 4 more applications in that immediate area, and we're not build not one affordable unit, or have revenue to look elsewhere for other alternatives, and it's done. We've just had a suburbia built, and the horse is out of the barn. So I want to address the rules up front, so people know, and we want developers to make money. Nothing is more better than everybody being successful, but everybody needs to be successful.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to go too far off the subject of this public hearing, but I do want to kind of bounce off of what Supervisor Patella was bringing up. Can we have staff come back and let us know what an ordinance would look like with the mandatory development agreement at some future date?
Yes. Both the CAO, Mr. Barnes, and County Counsel's office have met repeatedly on this issue, and it wasn't, our last meeting wasn't that long ago. It was maybe a week or two ago, and Mr. Barnes, who is spearheading the ordinance change, could probably address it more closely, but we've had lengthy discussions about how our application ordinance needs to change, how the DA needs to be included in that, and as far as I know, they're working on it.
Yes, we are actively working on an affordable housing ordinance. We have our housing element is going to be going to the Planning Commission next week before it comes to the board, and that has a affordable housing component to it, which would then support the creation of an affordable housing ordinance, which we're currently working on. We hope to have some type of draft for the Planning Commission next week, and then fine tune it, and then have the appropriate public hearings for it. So that is something that is high on our. It's the top item on our list.
Any other comments from Board members?
Just one more comment, Mr. Chair. It's just that I urge the developer to really think about what the concern of the board members up here, that if there's any way you can incorporate, smaller units for affordability, we would encourage you. I know that we can't impose a development agreement because that's not part of the ordinance, but certainly you hear us out, and we feel that's a great need. So see if you can do something to help us in that respect.
Right, and I couldn't agree with that more. The one issue I have from the conversations I've had with my planning commissioner and from members of the community is we have a project before us, or we're going to have a project before us that lacks affordable units. And when we talk about affordability these days, we talk about our police officers, our firefighters, teachers. I work at San Benito High School full time, and I would have to say 80% of that workforce they rent. And they rent out of the county, because they can't afford to live here. And so we're talking about housing for working professionals, that want to stay in this community that they serve. I think it's extremely important, not only for this project, but for all projects moving forward. And I think that, I think that's something that we need to achieve. At this time, I'll ask for public comment.
Marty Richard,
Open the public hearing.
Since this discussion came up in relation to this, I'll just pick it up right where you left it. The affordability issues within your purview. Development agreements are within your purview. And frankly, as a member of the public who comes here and complains all the time, I just found something else to complain about, which is I don't understand this ad hoc business every time a developer comes in, and I'm not here to protect the developers. It's your problem. It's not their problem. You've done a housing element every time you've done a general plan. And every one of them has got an affordability requirement in the housing element, and you put it in there because you can't even get your housing element approved by the state if it doesn't have an affordability element in it. And you know it, and I know it. So if you don't have an affordability regulation, that's because you don't have it, not because they don't have it. And if you don't have one on other things that you're supposed to have, it's because you don't have it. And if the impact fees aren't up to date, it's because you didn't do it. I don't get it. I sit here every meeting and we do the same thing. The developer comes and we go, please do this. And we really need affordable housing, and you have it within your power to develop that program, and you don't do it, and then you come in and you say, well, let's tell the developer we really need this. May I make a suggestion? Why don't you do your half of the work, and then they will have to do their part of the work. They won't have any choice. If you make a development agreement mandatory, they'll have to have one. If you make affordable housing mandatory, they'll have to do it. Let's do our part of the job, and maybe it'll be a lot easier to get other people to do their part of the job. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marty. I've been instructed by staff I have to formally open the public hearing.
Oh, excuse me, do I get to say it all?
I would like to hear it again.
So consider the public hearing open.
Is that S at the end, Marty?
They probably didn't get that on tape. That's the problem.
What was that?
So with that, I'll bring it back to this board. Any additional comments, questions?
No, I think we said what we had to say, and I think Marty's right, but I think we've given direction to staff that we want to move in that direction. It's time.
Okay, so now I will, having just recently opened the public hearing, I will close the public hearing. All right, so I'll leave it to the board to provide some direction to staff.
I will make a motion to approve per staff recommendation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Okay.
So we will break for lunch for till 2:15.
2:15? Okay. We're going to have a long day today.
No, when we get back.
Yes, I agree.